The Mecklenburg County election debates are a service of WTVI, Mecklenburg County, and the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. The views and opinions expressed in these debates are those of the candidates and do not necessarily represent the views of WTVI, its management, Mecklenburg County, or the League of Women Voters.
PBS Charlotte and the League of Women Voters present Election Debate 2016.
Hello, I'm Danielle Koester with PBS Charlotte. Welcome to the U.S. House District 12 primary debate, sponsored by PBS Charlotte and the League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll talk with the two Republican candidates running in the U.S. House District 12 race. The League of Women Voters of Charlotte-Mecklenburg provided the questions for the debate. The candidates have not heard the questions in advance. I'll call on the candidates in random order to answer questions. They'll have 30 seconds and 1 minute to answer each question. I'll be sure to let you know in advance just how much time you have to respond. Now, if you'd like to challenge your opponent, just raise up that yellow challenge card. You'll have 30 seconds to respond. Each candidate has three challenges during this debate. There are no opening statements, but each candidate will have the opportunity to make a 30-second closing statement. And now let's meet the Republican candidates for U.S. House District 12. The candidates are Ryan Duffy and Leon Threet. And for our first question, we'll begin with you, Mr. Duffy. For this question, you'll each have 30 seconds to respond. This question is for both of you. Why are you running to represent the people in U.S. House District 12?
Well, I'm running for Congress because our government's not listening to us anymore. And I saw that there was a chance for a Republican to get the nomination in this district. And having come from many diverse districts, I feel very comfortable in this one as well. So that's why I'm running to bring a voice of change to the government.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. And now your response, Mr. Threet.
Well, I'm running for the 12th Congressional District because I believe that I can do the greatest amount of good for the largest number of people. I so believe that our government should work and our representatives should work for the people. And I'm ready to do just that as the congressional leader for the 12th.
Thank you. For the next question, you'll each have 30 seconds to respond. This question, what makes you a superior candidate in this primary than your opponent? We'll start with you, Mr. Threet.
Well, I believe that my unique skill set, I have had the great privilege of defending our Constitution for 10 years of active duty as a U.S. Marine. I had the great privilege of serving our Charlotte-Mecklenburg community as a Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer, walking the beat in the 12th, serving that for 8.5 years. And I've also had the privilege of working in the 12th as a senior pastor here in the Charlotte area. Very much involved, very much connected to the issues of the people here in the 12th. And I believe those unique skill sets give me a place to lead in the 12th.
Thank you. And your response, Mr. Duffy?
Well, I think having lived all over the country, I see how different communities live, and transportation issues and community issues and racial issues and all that. Having studied politics for 25 years, worked in the financial industry for a long time, I think I understand the financial industry, which is a big part of this industry as well. So I think I bring a lot of qualifications to this race.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. For this next question, you'll both have 1 minute to respond. What can you do to help bridge the divide between Republicans and Democrats in Congress? And we are going to start with you, Mr. Duffy.
Well, to bring together Republicans and Democrats, I think we need to communicate with people and not just have talking points, but make them understand exactly how a minimum wage increase might actually affect them. It's not just you're getting more money, there's also a lot of other implications to that. So I think if we can communicate to Democrats, we can maybe build some more consensus that are well informed.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Your response, Mr. Threet.
Thank you. That's a very good question, and certainly has been posed to me a number of times. I believe that my unique experience of working with the public and working with those with perhaps even opposing views have given me a position and a high regard for others. I don't think we have to all agree on the same issues in order to work well together. I'd like to believe that Republicans and Democrats are committed to what's best for America and what's best for the 12th. I believe that I'm committed and able to work with those opposing views. So I think that will work for our good, and I think the Republicans and the Democrats can do just that, and I'm ready to lead that way.
Thank you, Mr. Threet. Now for this next question, you will each have 1 minute again to respond. What role should the federal government play in creating good jobs to help the people in District 12? Mr. Threet, we'll start with you.
Well, I think the federal government plays an important role, but the federal government cannot create the jobs solely themselves. You know, from my assessment, the federal government sets policies and set those policies in such a way that liberates free enterprise, liberates jobs that are started and sustained and maintained in the community level. And so foreign trade policy, for one, influences and certainly has greatly influenced the job market in the 12th district. And so the federal government sets policies, but yet also the federal government and the legislators can be an inspiration to help foster and encourage free enterprise in our communities. And so I think one of the great roles of government is not to tie the hands of creative and innovative ideas in our communities, but help free them to do what's natural to each of us, and that is to start and maintain our own businesses and to see our community thrive.
Thank you, Mr. Threet. And Mr. Duffy, your response.
Well, the role I think that the federal government has is pretty minimal. I believe that the government should enforce the rule of law, which is one reason why this country has been such a great place for people to come and invest, because it is a stable political system and a stable economy. But large parts of our history, we've had a fairly unfettered economic system where people can start small businesses and thrive. We've seen that the more that the government has gotten involved, the harder it is to do anything. And just the debt alone is stifling economic growth. So I think the government should start curtailing its involvement in the economy and focusing on keeping a level playing field for the people who want to start businesses and enforcing the rule of law.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. For this next question, you'll each have 30 seconds to respond. The question is, do you support an increase in the federal minimum wage? And we'll start with you, Mr. Duffy.
No, I don't. I think, first of all, we ought to reject the premise that people ought to be living and having careers, based on the minimum wage. The minimum wage is a wage that people can get into the economy and get experience and start moving up the ladder. It's not meant to be a career path. Not to mention the fact that, the minimum wage will actually displace a lot of people, put a lot of people out of jobs, and maybe even replace them with computers and technology.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Your response, Mr. Threet.
It's an interesting question, but it doesn't leave a lot of leadway. I'd say yes and no. I think what we need are living wages. Now, should the federal government mandate a minimum wage? Perhaps, yes. But at the same time, you cannot raise and maintain a family, at least not a family that will thrive financially on a minimum wage. We need more than minimum wages. We need living wages where you can take care of your family and thrive in your communities. So the government sets limits, but I think we need far more than the minimum wage.
Thank you. For this next question, you'll each have 1 minute to respond. What's your position on an independent redistricting commission? Do you think the present system of redistricting is working? We'll start with you, Mr. Threet.
Well, we certainly find ourselves now facing the challenges of the present district drawings. And I do think an independent panel, an independent team group should be the ones setting those boundary lines. I think the present system perhaps certainly has come about by both parties working together. But I do think an independent group will probably create a more fairer, more balanced district line. So I do support that. I also think that we must always keep in mind that really the districting is really about what's best for the citizens of North Carolina, not what's best for each party. And we should be laboring and working toward what's best for North Carolinians.
Thank you. Now your response, Mr. Duffy.
Ideally, I would like any commission that would review this to be independent and not have a partisan slant to it. Obviously, this is one of the more, well, the most gerrymandered district in the country, I believe. So, you know, the more it gets tweaked with, the more people we're gonna have, you know, chaos in elections in the future, like we're seeing now. So, yeah, I would favor that.
For this next question, you'll each have 30 seconds to respond. The question is, given that the Affordable Care Act is the law of the land, what can be done to improve on it? And we'll begin with you, Mr. Duffy.
Well, I kind of reject the premise that it's the law of the land. I'd like to repeal that law. I think it's been a drag on the economy. Most of the growth that the Democrats will cite as people being covered comes from the increase in Medicaid. And I would work to repeal it and replace it with free market health care. A lot of our companies are suffering massive financial losses as a result of the health care law, and a lot of people can't start small businesses because of it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Mr. Threet, your response?
Well, I fully agree with Mr. Duffy on that. I think we do need to repeal the affordable, which has become an unaffordable health care act, and it has cost a tremendous amount of pull on the economy, as has been stated. Also, I think it's caused a failure in the health care plan. I personally lost my health care because of the so-called Affordable Health Care Act. I could no longer afford it. And I believe it creates a welfare state, which I do not support. I believe free enterprise and a free market system is best for our health care programs, and I'd support such a thing.
Thank you, Mr. Threet. Health insurance companies claim to be losing money on ACA claimants. If we had Medicare for all, insurance premium funds could go directly to actual health care rather than executive salaries and shareholder dividends. What's wrong with this claim? You'll each have 1 minute to answer this question, and we'll start with you, Mr. Threet.
Well, I think that, again, the whole premise of free market economies are far better, even in health care, even in financial, in every arena. Free market society works far better than a top-down governmentally controlled system. And so I spoke with my healthcare agent some weeks ago, and he shared very openly that they're facing tremendous financial loss because of this affordable health care plan and process. And so I think it needs to be revised. I think we need to make changes, and I think we need to return our healthcare program back to the free market where there can be innovation and creation of healthy and a healthcare plan that serves everyone. I think we can fix what we have and had, but not a governmental takeover. And I think that's what we've had, and I think ultimately we all lose. When the government takes over, we lose efficiency, and we also lose the kind of quality health care that we've been so honored and grateful to have here in America.
Thank you. Your response, Mr. Duffy.
Well, I agree with that. One of the things that rarely gets discussed with this Obamacare law is the fundamental nature of the transformation of our relationship to government. And I think that's possibly one of the biggest things at issue here, that you know, even Jonathan Turley, a liberal professor, a constitutional scholar, said it was one of the most dramatic shifts in states' rights in the history of the country. And now all we talk about is how to make it more efficient, how to streamline this, streamline that. And I think that's, as Americans, that should be the paramount issue that we're discussing. And I think we should scrap the whole thing and go back to a free market system.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. For this next question, you'll each have 1 minute to respond. The question is, what, if any, restrictions would you place on persons wanting to buy guns? We'll start with you, Mr. Duffy.
Well, I just believe anybody who's got a criminal record or is found to be mentally incompetent should be prohibited from owning a firearm. But otherwise, I'm a strong proponent of the Second Amendment. And I don't believe there's a crisis, it's a dramatic need to get guns out of the hands of people. So I'm just a proponent of it in general.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. Your response, Mr. Threet.
Well, I also support very much so the Second Amendment, and I also believe that, from my personal experience as a Charlotte-Mecklenburg police officer, that law-abiding citizens are generally not the problem with handguns or guns, period. And the criminals seldom get permission to carry a gun. So whether they are convicted felons or whether they have a criminal intent, they're not going to abide by the law. So to minimize our Second Amendment rights is undermining the whole process in which it was created. And so I greatly support the Second Amendment, and I don't think that's going to solve the problem by minimizing the citizens' rights to carry firearms. In fact, I believe very often it's the opposite. When citizens are able to protect and defend their own homes and their own communities, I think ultimately our communities are far safer than when the criminals alone are able to carry firearms.
Thank you, Mr. Three. For this next question, again, you'll both have 1 minute to respond. The question is, how will you work across the aisle to modernize the Voting Rights Act? And we will begin with you, Mr. Three.
Well, I think certainly some strides and steps have been made in IDing here in North Carolina. I would think that that's still a standard in which we all should look at, that we verify and validate those who are voting. And also, I would find it very interesting that we have such a privilege in this nation to vote, and that we have a representative government, and yet in 2014, we had in the general election only 36% of the eligible voters showed up to vote. In order to elevate the importance of the Voters' Right Act, I think the voters must show up and then vote, and vote their conscience, vote what they believe, because that's the great privilege of our republic, is that we get a chance to elect officials that best represent our values and our views. And I think we need to motivate and activate the voting public to take a full responsibility, an active responsibility in who leads and governs our land. Thank you.
Thank you. Now your response, Mr. Duffy.
Well, I think the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a very important act for the progress of our country, great strides in civil rights. But today we're talking about abolishing any standard for voting whatsoever, which is, I think it's uncalled for. Some people in some countries would walk through fire to get to a voting booth. Here, Democrats think that you're not even able to obtain a free vote ID to show up to vote. So I think this is a big, it's a non-issue as far as, I mean, if you're not able to get a free ID, then I don't know if you should be deciding healthcare policy. I mean, you shouldn't even, you should try to vote, put some effort to voting, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Duffy. And for our final question, we will have 1 minute to respond to the question. The question is, do you believe there should be term limits for U.S. congressmen and women? Why or why not? And we'll start with you, Mr. Duffy.
Well, ideally, we wouldn't have term limits, but I've come to the conclusion that we probably should have term limits. Washington does do things to people. I believe it's part of the compromising nature. They go there, they compromise, and it gets easier and easier to compromise until one day they're part of the problem. So I would limit myself to 3 terms in Congress. I would also support a term limit bill or amendment to the Constitution as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Three, your response?
Well, I think that our founders understood what they were doing when they created the Constitution and all that goes with that. I would not support term limits. In essence, we do have term limits. For Congress, every 2 years you re-elect or elect those ones. For the Senate, every 6 years. And if the people so desire to re-elect a particular congressperson, they have the responsibility and the right. I would encourage, though, that the voting public would take very seriously the responsibility of electing officials to represent them. And then identify those ones that no longer do that, and then recall them every 2 years for the House and every 6 years for the Senate. I think that in itself is sufficient. I would not support a term limit set by an amendment, but I do support that the voters are given that privilege every 2 and every 6 years.
Thank you. Now it's time for our 30-second closing statements, and we'll begin with you, Mr. Duffy.
Thank you, Danielle. Thanks for hosting this debate. Today, our representatives in Washington behave more as if they're representing Washington to us than us to Washington. We have bureaucrats, lobbyists, and think tanks writing massive bills that legislators pretty much just rubber stamp. John Conyers said as much in 2009 when he said, "What's the good of reading a bill if you need 2 days and 2 lawyers before you can understand what you've just read?" Is this representative government legislators that pass sweeping legislation and massive executive branch personnel that are unaccountable to the people? If you want to reverse the trajectory, please vote for me, Ryan Duffy, at duffyforcongress.com. Thank you very much.
And now it's time for your 30-second closing statement, Mr. Threet.
Well, I certainly believe that we need changes in Washington. I'm certainly very, very concerned about the gridlock that we've seen over the last several years in Washington. I'm ready and willing to lead in a different fashion. I believe that I can work across the aisle with those from an opposing party. I also believe that I bring a unique skill set of experience, a skill set of problem solving, a skill set of leadership. I've had the privilege of leading as a U.S. Marine. I've had the privilege of leading in our community as a police officer. I've also had the privilege of serving in our community for 28 years as a senior pastor. I'm ready to lead in Washington, and I thank you for the vote. Vote Threet, Leon Threet for Congress. Thank you.
Again, we want to say thanks to each of the Republican candidates and the U.S. House District 12 race for taking part in this debate. For more information about the League of Women Voters, just go to www.goleague.org. Please remember to cast your vote. The primary will be held Tuesday, March 15th.